Mysterious crimes that shook ancient cities to fall asleep to before memory learned how to hold itself together, before history hardened into dates and names. There was blood on stone that refused to be forgotten. It pulled at the gates of Uruk, dark and shining in the low light of early morning, seeping into the dust where countless feet had passed in ritual order. The gates had seen arrivals and departures, triumphs and laments, the steady breathing of a city that believed itself eternal. But this blood did not belong there. It did not follow law. It did not answer prayer. It lay heavy and wrong, as if the earth itself hesitated before accepting it. Uruk was not merely a city. It was an idea given walls, rising from the southern plains of Mesopotamia. It shimmered beneath the sun like something dreamed into being. Its mud-brick towers glowed amber at dawn. Its temples exhaled incense and song, and its streets carried the first written words humanity ever pressed into clay. Here, kings ruled by divine favor. Here, justice was carved into tablets and displayed as permanence itself. To live in Uruk was to believe that order had finally defeated chaos, and yet, one morning, order failed. The body was discovered just inside the eastern gate, where traders from distant lands were meant to enter beneath the watchful eyes of guards and gods. It was not laid out in ritual repose. It was not cleansed, nor wrapped, nor offered the dignity of preparation. It was torn, limbs twisted in unnatural angles, flesh marked by violence that felt intimate rather than ceremonial. Whoever had died there had not been granted meaning. Some tablets suggest the dead was a man of rank and official, perhaps a priest whose words once carried weight within the temples. His name is broken on the clay, the signs fractured as if the scribe's hand had faltered or been stopped. Other fragments omit the name entirely, referring only to the one at the gate. It is as though the city itself hesitated to remember who he was. In Uruk, bloodshed was not unknown, but it was controlled. Executions followed ritual. Punishment was public and lawful, witnessed by gods and people alike. Violence without structure threatened the balance between heaven and earth. This death did not belong to any known category. It was too savage for judgment, too chaotic for sacrifice, too deliberate to be accident. Whispers followed quickly, moving through markets and courtyards like a cold wind. Some said the man had angered powerful figures within the palace, that he knew something he should not have known. In this telling, the violence was meant to look uncontrolled. A performance of chaos meant to hide a quiet decision made behind closed doors. A political death dressed as madness. Others told a darker story. They spoke of hunger stalking the city in those days, of fields yielding less grain, of offerings failing to please the gods. When divine favor wavered, fear followed. Perhaps the people, desperate and terrified, turned on one of their own. Perhaps the man at the gate was chosen in panic. A living offering torn apart by hands that believed blood might restore balance. And then there were murmurs no one spoke aloud, only breathed in the dark, of a forbidden ritual attempted in secret, of words spoken incorrectly, of forces invited and not dismissed. In such stories, the body at the gate was not murdered in anger or fear, but destroyed in haste, as if those involved realized too late what they had awakened. What gives the crime its lasting power is not any single explanation, but what followed, or rather, what did not. There was no trial, no public reckoning, no record of punishment, apology, or cleansing rite performed at the gates. In a city that wrote everything down, contracts, hymns, laws, inventories, the silence is deafening. The tablets move on. Grain is counted. Temples receive offerings. Kings boast of victories. Life continues as if the blood had never darkened the stone. This absence feels deliberate, like a wound carefully bandaged so no one has to see it heal wrong. Uruk was obsessed with permanence. Its walls were built to last. Its stories were pressed into clay so they could outlive flesh. Forgetting was not a weakness of the culture, it was a choice. And so historians have long wondered what truth was too dangerous to preserve. Perhaps the victim's death revealed a fracture in divine authority. If a priest could be torn apart without consequence, what did that say about the god's protection? Perhaps the crime implicated the king himself, whose legitimacy depended on flawless order. To record the truth would be to admit that the sacred hierarchy had failed. Or perhaps the city feared something even more unsettling, that the violence was collective, that many hands were stained, and that justice would require condemning itself. At night, one can imagine Uruk in those days, the streets quiet under starlight, oil lamps flickering against brick, the gates standing open, repaired and washed. but still holding the memory of what happened there. Guards speaking in lowered voices, priests lingering longer at their prayers, a city holding its breath. Time passed. Generations rose and fell. Uruk's kings changed. Its temples were rebuilt, its walls repaired again and again. The blood at the gate dried, flaked, and was eventually swallowed by dust. But something of it remained, embedded not in stone, but in silence. When the city finally declined, when its walls collapsed and its streets emptied, the crime was still, unresolved. Wind moved through ruins that once echoed with life. Broken tablets lay scattered like bones, and somewhere beneath the sand, the place where blood once pooled waited to be found again. 5,000 years later, archaeologists uncovered fragments of that silence, incomplete records, broken names, the faint outline of a moment Uruk chose not to explain. The mystery does not shout. It murmurs. It asks not who killed, but why forgetting felt safer than truth. Some crimes are never solved because they reveal too much. They strip away the stories civilizations tell themselves and expose the fragile fear beneath. The murder at Uruk's gates was not merely an act of violence. It was a mirror held up to the first city that dared to call itself eternal. And even now, long after Uruk has returned to dust, that mirror still waits stark, patient, and unblinking for anyone willing to look. The city did not scream when it died. It did not burn, nor crumble beneath armies, nor collapse beneath the roar of gods. It simply fell quiet, so quietly that even death seemed unsure where to settle. Mohenjo-daro rose beside the Indus like a carefully kept secret. Its streets ran straight as if drawn by a steady hand, its bricks fired to identical measure, its drains hidden beneath stone so water and waste could disappear without ceremony. This was a city built for order, for rhythm, for the general continuity of daily life. Nothing in its design suggested fear. Nothing prepared the earth for what would one day be found lying where footsteps once passed. When the bodies emerged, they did so without warning. They were not buried. They were not gathered. They lay scattered, one collapsed in a courtyard, another fallen near a wall, others resting where shadow might once have offered relief from the sun. Their bones bore no uniform story. Some skulls showed signs of violent impact. Others were untouched, as if death had come without a blow. No weapons rested nearby. No scorch marks darkened the stones. No mass grave claimed them as a single event. They were simply there, abandoned by ritual, ignored by explanation. The people of Mohenjo-daro had customs. Archaeology tells us this much. They honored cleanliness. They respected space. Even their dead, in earlier times, were carefully interred, accompanied by objects meant to ease the passage beyond life. To leave bodies exposed to let them rest where they fell was not merely negligence. It was unthinkable, and yet, that is exactly what the earth preserved. The silence surrounding these deaths is heavier than any scream. No inscriptions remain to explain them. No monuments warn of disaster. The seals and symbols of the Indus people speak of trade, of animals, of patterns repeated until meaning becomes rhythm, but none of them tell of catastrophe. Some have imagined invasion, strangers from distant lands, breaking through the city's calm with violence. But Mohenjo-daro shows no signs of siege. Its walls are not scarred. Its buildings are not smashed in haste. An invading force leaves chaos behind. Here, the chaos is intimate and selective. Others have whispered of disease, a sudden sickness that dropped people where they stood. But disease does not erase burial rites so completely. Even fear-stricken cities tend their dead, if only hurriedly, and disease does not break skulls. Natural disaster, too, struggles to explain the scene. Floods came and went along the Indus, but floods leave sediment, not restraint marks. Earthquakes fracture walls, not bodies alone. The most unsettling possibility is the one hardest to name, that the violence came from within. Mohenjo-daro had no visible palaces, no grand tombs, no overt symbols of kingship. Power here was quiet, perhaps collective, perhaps hidden in councils, or priesthoods that left no monuments. If authority fractured, if trust eroded, there would be no single throne to topple, no obvious villain to record. Imagine a moment when order failed. The drains still flowed, the streets still aligned, but something invisible shifted. Perhaps food grew scarce, perhaps the river betrayed its course, perhaps belief itself faltered. In such moments, societies turn inward, searching for cause, for blame, and when answers do not arrive from the sky, they are often taken from neighbors. The bodies do not lie together. They are scattered, suggesting not one act, but many. Small eruptions of violence, sudden confrontations, lives ended without witness, without closure, without the dignity of explanation. What chills the soul is what followed next. The city was not destroyed, it was abandoned. Homes were emptied deliberately. Valuable objects were taken. Streets were left clean. It was as if the survivors reached a shared, unspoken decision. This place could no longer hold them. Whatever had happened here, whatever line had been crossed, it had made Mohenjo-Daro uninhabitable. Not physically, but spiritually. To stay would be to live beside unanswered death, and so they left, walking away from the city that had given them order and identity. They carried their silence with them, leaving behind only bricks and bones. Thousands of years later, when the wind moves across the ruins, it does not sound like mourning. It sounds like restraint, like a story that refuses to be told aloud. The bodies remain where they fell, not because no one cared, but because caring may have been too dangerous. Some crimes do not shatter civilizations with fire. Some simply make them leave. Beneath the stone and sunlight of Knossos, beneath, the laughter painted on walls and the rhythm of feet leaping over bowls. Something waited in the dark. It waited patiently, sealed beneath floors that once echoed with ceremony, beneath corridors that curved like living things, while the palace above breathed color and motion. The earth below held its breath, and in that held breath lay a body placed, hidden, and forgotten with care that felt almost reverent. Knossos was not a city built for shadows. It rose on the island of Crete like a celebration made solid, its frescoes alive with blue and red, its rooms unfolding without straight lines, without the harsh certainty of walls meant for war. There were no battlements here, no defensive towers. The Minoans trusted in the sea, in ritual, in balance. They believed life itself could be choreographed into harmony. The palace was the heart of this belief, a vast, breathing structure of staircases and courtyards, storage rooms heavy with grain and oil, shrines where offerings met the gaze of unseen powers. To walk its halls was to feel movement everywhere, priests, servants, dancers, messengers, everyone part of a living pattern. And yet, beneath this movement, something was very still. The remains were found in a small, enclosed space beneath the palace floor, not tossed or discarded, but placed. The bones suggested restraint. The position suggested intention. This was not a burial meant for the dead's comfort, nor an execution meant for public warning. It was a concealment. The Minoans left no written explanations. Their script survives only in fragments, undeciphered, mute to modern ears. So the bones must speak alone. They tell of a human life ended away from witnesses, beneath the feet of those who continued their rituals above, unaware or perhaps all too aware of what rested below. Some have called it sacrifice. Human sacrifice is a word that trembles with discomfort, especially when spoken of a culture so often remembered for beauty and grace. But traces exist across the ancient world, moments when fear overpowered mercy, when blood was believed to steady the cosmos. The bones at Knossos show marks that suggest the body was bound. The placement suggests ceremony, but a ceremony that ended not in offering, but in hiding. If this was sacrifice, why bury it beneath stone? Why conceal it within the palace itself, instead of displaying it to the gods beneath open sky? Others believed the death was political. Knossos was powerful. Power, even when wrapped in silk and painted with dolphins, breeds rivals. A figure who threatened balance, who knew too much, challenged authority. Disrupted ritual order might need to be erased quietly, not executed publicly, where questions would multiply, or removed, absorbed into the palace itself, as if the structure could swallow dissent. There is a cruel poetry in this idea, to be killed beneath the very symbol of harmony, to become part of its foundation, silenced so completely that even memory hesitates. What deepens the mystery is what happened next. Knossos did not fall once. It fell again and again. Earthquakes shook the island. Fires tore through the palace, and each time, the Minoans rebuilt. New floors were laid. Walls were repainted. Life resumed, and with each reconstruction, the hidden body was sealed further away from light. If the death had been accidental, why not acknowledge it? During rebuilding, if it had been ritual, why not repeat or record it? The silence suggests unease, an awareness that whatever had been done should not be revisited. The palace itself became a labyrinth not just of rooms, but a memory. Stories of the Minotaur would later cling to these ruins, a monster hidden beneath stone, fed in secret, born of transgression and shame, Myths often grow from shadows cast by truth. One cannot help but wonder whether the idea of something terrible hidden below was already present, long before poets gave it teeth. Imagine life continuing above the buried bones, music in the courtyards, oil lamps flickering against painted plaster, bare feet slapping stone as dancers leapt and turned, priests murmuring prayers for balance, for calm seas, for fertile land. And beneath it all, a human presence denied ritual, denied story, denied name. Perhaps not everyone forgot. Perhaps some walked those halls knowing exactly where not to step. Perhaps some felt unease they could not explain, a faint wrongness in the air, like breath held along. Cultures are skilled at building beauty over guilt. They do it brick by brick, generation by generation, until even the builders forget what lies beneath. When the palace finally fell for the last time, when Knossos emptied and its colors faded into dust, the body remained. It waited centuries beneath rubble and roots, until strangers uncovered it and asked questions the Minoans never answered. Was it a gift to the gods that went wrong? A crime committed in secret? A life erased to protect an illusion of perfection? The bones do not accuse, they do not explain, they simply exist. An interruption in the story of grace and balance. Knossos is remembered for light sunlit courtyards, flowing forms, joyous motion, but every light casts a shadow. And beneath the palace that taught the world to dream of labyrinths, one shadow remains unmapped. Some mysteries are not loud. They are pressed gently into the earth and covered with beauty. And when uncovered, they do not roar, they whisper, reminding us that even the most graceful civilizations are capable of quiet, careful violence. The palace has long since fallen silent. The dancers have gone. The frescoes flake and fade. But beneath the stone, the question still rests, unmoving, patient as bone. What kind of harmony requires a human life to be hidden beneath it? The city was born in sunlight and died in erasure. Akhenaten rose from the desert as an act of defiance against tradition, against memory, against the long shadows of gods whose names had ruled Egypt for centuries. It was built quickly, urgently, as if time itself were an enemy. White limestone caught the sun and flung it back toward the heavens. Temples opened to the sky instead of closing inward. No roofs blocked the light. No darkness was meant to survive. Here, this was a city dedicated to a single god, Aten, the living disk of the sun. And at its center stood Akhenaten, the heretic king, his body elongated in art, his gaze lifted eternally upward. He promised truth without mystery, divinity without secrecy. Under his rule, the old gods were silenced, their names chiseled from walls, their priests scattered like ash. For a brief moment, Akhenaten breathed with purpose. Couriers arrived. Artists reimagined the human form. Hymns were written not to hidden forces, but to light itself. The city stretched along the Nile, orderly yet restless, as if it knew it did not belong to the past or the future. Then something went wrong. It is not recorded in clear lines or decisive words. Egyptian scribes were masters of permanence, but they were also masters of omission. What survives instead are fractures, faces smashed from reliefs, names erased so thoroughly that even their outlines were wounded, tombs begun with care and abandoned mid-carving, as if death itself had been interrupted. Among these absences, one stands darker than the rest. A royal figure vanished. Some believe it was Nefertiti, the queen who once stood beside Akhenaten as equal, her beauty carved with reverence, her presence undeniable. Others speak of a co-regent, perhaps a son or brother elevated too quickly, whose rise threatened balance. Whoever it was, their disappearance was not gentle. Their memory was not allowed to fade naturally. It was attacked. Their images were defaced with fury. Their name was scratched away, sometimes replaced, sometimes left as raw stone. This was not the quiet forgetting of time. It was an act of violence committed against memory itself. And yet no tomb was completed. No body was laid to rest. In Egypt, this was unthinkable. Death was not an end, but a transformation. Without burial rites, without a preserved name, the soul was condemned to wander, unanchored, unable to join the eternal cycle. To deny someone this passage was the cruelest punishment imaginable. It was not just murder, it was annihilation. What crime could warrant such an erasure? Some whisper of betrayal within the palace walls. Akhenaten's revolution had enemies, priests of the old gods, generals uneasy with religious upheaval, nobles stripped of influence. Perhaps the vanished figure attempted to restore the past or challenge the king's divine authority. In such a fragile ideological experiment, descent would have been catastrophic. Others imagine a more intimate darkness, a family fracture, a struggle for succession, love curdling into fear beneath the relentless sun. In this telling, the crime was not political theater, but private desperation, carried out in shadows that the city was never meant to have. What remains undeniable is the aftermath. Akhetaten did not fall to invasion. Its walls were not breached. Its temples were not burned by foreign hands. Instead, the city was abandoned with stunning speed. Statues were toppled, shrines dismantled, homes left half-cleared, as if the inhabitants fled not in panic, but in shame. The new rulers ordered the city's name erased from records. Stones were reused elsewhere. Their inscriptions turned inward so the light would not touch them. Akhenaten himself was cursed. His legacy declared a mistake. The city dedicated to truth was deemed dangerous to remember. And somewhere within this collapse, a death or several remained unresolved. Imagine the final days. The sun still rose over the cliffs. Eden still poured light onto empty courtyards. But footsteps grew fewer. Voices softened. Officials avoided certain corridors. Artisans stopped carving faces they knew would soon be destroyed. The air must have felt brittle, as if a single word spoken aloud could shatter what little remained. The crime was never named. Naming it would have required acknowledging that the new order had failed, that the god of light had cast a shadow, too deep to survive. So Egypt chose forgetting. When sand finally claimed Akhetaten, it did so gently. No siege scars mar its ruins. No mass graves tell of slaughter. Just empty foundations and defaced stone, stretching in silence along the Nile's bend. A city, built to erase darkness, erased instead. What haunts scholars is not just who vanished, but why their absence demanded such total destruction. Cities survive assassinations. They endure betrayals. But Akhetaten could not survive memory. Perhaps the crime revealed that even light requires shadow to exist. That purity, when enforced without mercy, becomes brittle. That a city built on a single truth cannot withstand contradiction. The nameless figure denied burial still wanders. The margins of history, neither alive nor properly dead. Their erased face peers out from damaged reliefs, a reminder that silence is also a form of speech. Akhetaten promised eternity in sunlight. What it left behind was a warning etched into stone and sand, that some truths, when exposed too suddenly, can destroy the very world meant to receive them. And as night falls over its ruins, one can almost feel the sun hesitate uncertain whether it should rise again over a place that learned, delayed, how deadly forgetting can be. The earth beneath Athens is dry, pale, and unforgiving. It remembers everything, long before voices learned to argue beneath marble colonnades, before words like justice and freedom were shaped into ideals. The soil outside the city drank deeply of blood. It did so quietly, without ceremony, without inscription, and then it was covered, smoothed over, and left to wait. The pit lay hidden for centuries, unmarked and unhonored. When it was finally uncovered, the bones spoke a language older than philosophy, one of fear, urgency, and deliberate silence. They were found tangled together. Dozens of bodies pressed into a narrow grave, limbs bound, skulls shattered. Some had died quickly, others less so. There were no offerings placed beside them, no tokens for the journey beyond life, no names. In a land that would later exalt the spoken word, these men were denied even that. Athens, at the time, was not. Yet the city of ideals it would one day become. It was young, restless, still learning how power should be held. Aristocratic families controlled land and law, and rivalry ran like a fever through the city's veins. Allegiance shifted easily. Trust was thin, the fear of tyranny of one man rising to far. The fast hung over the city like an approaching storm. The men in the pit were young and strong, their teeth well kept, their bones marked by labor and health. These were not criminals dragged from shadows. They were citizens, perhaps soldiers, perhaps followers of a cause that failed before it could be named. Their wrists tell the story first. Many show signs of binding, rope pressed so tightly that the bone remembers. They were restrained asterisk, not in panic, but with preparation. Someone had decided, ahead of time, that these lives would end together. The blows to their skulls came later. There was no battlefield here, no clash of shields, no chaos of war. This was execution, but not the kind Athens would later ritualize with law and public judgment. This was swift, concealed, and collective, the kind of violence that does not want witnesses. What crime could justify such urgency? Ancient accounts hint at attempted coups, at factions plotting to seize control in the city's fragile early years. In such times, fear moves faster than truth. A rumor can feel like certainty. A possibility can demand immediate action. And when power believes itself threatened, mercy often becomes the first casualty. Perhaps these men followed a would-be tyrant whose name history chose not to preserve. Perhaps they were accused, rightly or wrongly, of plotting against the ruling order, or perhaps they were simply in the wrong place, bound together by suspicion rather than guilt. What is most unsettling is not that they were killed but how they were buried. They were thrown into the pit hastily, their bodies overlapping, their limbs twisted unnaturally. This was not the burial of the condemned, who in Greek custom were still afforded some dignity. This was disposal, as if the dead themselves were. Dangerous, and distance from them was urgently required. The pit was sealed quickly, earth pressed down. Life resumed. Athens did not record this event in its proud histories. Poets sang of heroes, not purges. Lawmakers spoke of balance, not fear. As generations passed, the city refined its self-image, polishing it until it gleamed with reason and restraint. And beneath it all, the bones waited. Imagine the night it happened. Torchlight flickering against stone. Orders whispered rather than shouted. The scrape of rope. The dull sound of impact, repeated until silence settled. The men who carried out the act would not have lingered. They would have worked quickly. Driven by necessity or terror or conviction, perhaps they believed they were saving the city. Perhaps they were. Civilizations often begin not with consensus, but with blood, drawn in panic. Stability is rarely born gently. It is forced into existence, then later sanctified by story. The pit suggests that Athens' path toward democracy passed through a moment. It chose not to remember, a moment when fear outweighed debate, when bodies were silenced so voices could later be heard. What makes the discovery so haunting is its intimacy. These men were not faceless enemies. They shared the same earth, the same language, the same gods as their executioners. Their deaths were not distant tragedies, but local ones, neighbors killing neighbors in the name of preservation, and yet Athens endured. It grew. It questioned itself. It built systems meant to prevent such unchecked violence from happening. Again, trials replaced torches, votes replaced whispers, law was elevated as a shield against fear. But shields are forged because wounds have already been suffered. The bone pit does not accuse Athens of hypocrisy. It reminds us of its origin, of the cost paid before ideals could take root, of the lives erased so a different future could be imagined. When the bones were lifted from the earth, they emerged into a city that prided itself on memory, on history, spoken aloud, debated, preserved, and yet, even now, the names of those men remain unknown. Their story is told only through fracture and silence. They do not ask to be avenged. They ask to be acknowledged. As night falls over Athens, and the city hums with modern life above ancient ground, the pit remains a quiet presence beneath the streets. It is a reminder that justice is not born perfect, that democracy has ancestors whose voices were never heard. Some cities are built on stone, others are built on choice. And beneath Athens, beneath its temples, its theaters, its promises, the earth still holds the memory of a moment when fear ruled and history looked away. The river did not stop flowing when the palace fell. It moved on in its ancient patience, carrying reeds and silt and reflections of the sky, indifferent to the silence gathering along its banks. Memphis, once the living heart of Egypt, learned this lesson slowly, that a city can lose its voice while the world around it continues to breathe. Memphis was old even by ancient standards. Long before Thebes rose to power, before pyramids hardened the horizon, Memphis governed the meeting point between Upper and Lower Egypt. Its temples anchored cosmic order. Its priests guarded rites meant to keep the sun rising and the dead at rest. Nothing here was meant to happen by accident, and yet, in the shadow of a temple wall, they found him. The remains were incomplete, a body without its proper form. Bones, scattered, not by time, but by hands that worked with purpose. The skull bore marks of violence, but the limbs were arranged in a way that suggested something ritualistic, almost careful. This was not the aftermath of robbery or random killing. This was an ending designed to mean something. What frightened those who discovered the site was not only how the man died, but who he might have been. Inscriptions nearby, partially erased, hinted at priestly authority. A guardian of sacred knowledge, a keeper of words meant only for gods. In Memphis, priests were more than servants, they were conduits. They held the power to name, to curse, to preserve the dead's journey beyond life. To kill such a man was to threaten the balance of the universe itself. Yet the greater crime came after death. The body had been desecrated, in Egyptian belief. Wholeness was everything. A body destroyed could not rise. A soul denied its form would wander, unmoored, unable to join the eternal cycle. This was not just murder, it was spiritual execution. Whoever ordered it understood exactly what they were doing. Why? Some believed the priest knew a secret that could not be allowed to endure. Perhaps he had uncovered corruption within the temple. Perhaps he had challenged royal authority, claiming the gods no longer favored those in power. In a civilization built on divine legitimacy, such words would be fatal. Others whisper of forbidden rites, ceremonies altered, spells misused, names spoken incorrectly. Magic in Egypt was not fantasy, it was technology of the sacred. To misuse it was to invite chaos. If the priest had crossed that line, his death may have been seen as necessary containment. But if this was justice, why erase it? No records describe his trial. No reliefs commemorate his fall. The site itself appears deliberately hidden. As though even acknowledging the act risked contamination, Memphis chose silence again, sealing the crime beneath stone and prayer. The city endured for centuries afterward. But something had shifted. Power moved south. The old certainty thinned. Memphis became a place of memory rather than command, its temples still standing, but listening, more than speaking. Imagine the night it happened. Torches held low, orders spoken softly. The careful destruction of a body not in anger, but in fear. Fear of what the man knew. Fear of what he might become, if allowed to rest whole. Fear of a soul wandering loose in the afterlife. Carrying truths meant to stay buried. Even now, the crime resists clarity. Was it a purge disguised as ritual? A ritual disguised as punishment? Or a desperate attempt to undo a mistake already made? When the Nile floods and recedes, it exposes layers of earth that remember older things than cities. Somewhere beneath Memphis, the scattered bones still lie, denied completion, denied peace. They remind us that ancient power feared knowledge as much as it revered it, that even in civilizations obsessed with eternity, some truths were considered too dangerous to survive. And so the river flows on, reflecting stars that do not judge, carrying away whispers of a crime that tried and failed to vanish completely. The city of gods was never meant to bleed. Teotihuacan rose from the high valley like a deliberate dream, avenues aligned with the heavens. Pyramids asterisk, stepping patiently toward the sky. Even its name, given long after its fall, speaks of reverence, the place where gods were born. No king's name survives here. No single ruler claims its stones. Power in Teotihuacan felt distant, abstract, absorbed into architecture and ritual rather than flesh. And yet, deep within the pyramid of the feathered serpent, the earth revealed a truth too heavy to ignore. They were found beneath the stone, bound and arranged with terrible precision, rows of bodies, hands tied behind their backs, some wearing necklaces of human teeth. Warriors, perhaps, captives, or citizens chosen for reasons the city never recorded. Their skulls bore marks of execution. Their ribs were open, as if something vital had been taken deliberately and with care. This was not chaos. This was design. Teotihuacan was at its height when these men died. The city stretched wide, its avenues alive with procession and trade. The pyramid of the sun loomed vast and serene. The moon pyramid watched in silence. Nothing in the visible city suggested desperation. And yet, beneath one of its most sacred structures, dozens of lives were ended together, sealed in the darkness as part of the foundation itself. Sacrifice, many say, but sacrifice is a word that softens what the bones reveal. These men were restrained. Some faced outward, as if meant to guard the pyramid even in death. Others were placed in mirrored positions, symmetry enforced down to the angle of their limbs. This was not the offering of volunteers stepping into the divine. This was execution carried out with ritual discipline. Why so many? Why here? Why then? Teotihuacan left no written explanations. Its murals show processions, deities flowing, water, and seeds, but no scenes of killing, like Mohenjo-Daro, like Uruk. It chose silence over confession. What we have instead is the language of placement, of repetition, of numbers that suggest urgency rather than tradition. Some scholars believe these deaths marked a moment of crisis, a bid to secure power through fear and spectacle. The pyramid of the feathered serpent was a political statement as much as a sacred one. Its construction coincided with changes in the city's leadership. with the consolidation of authority that may not have been as bloodless as the stone facades suggest. If this was a message, it was meant for both gods and people. To the gods, the offering of strength, of breath, of hearts still warm. To the people, a reminder, the city's harmony rested on obedience. The avenue might be wide and beautiful, but beneath it lay the cost of descent. Yet something about the burials resists easy explanation. Some of the dead wore symbols of status, others did not. The tooth necklaces suggest ritual identity, not humiliation. The care taken in their arrangement implies respect or fear rather than contempt. It raises a chilling possibility that these men were not enemies, but participants whose role was understood only within a closed circle. If so, what kind of belief demands the lives of its own guardians? Teotihuacan's power depended on balance between earth and sky, water and fire, life and death. But balance is fragile. It must be maintained, reinforced, sometimes violently. Perhaps the city believed that its survival required a moment of extreme devotion. Perhaps leaders feared the cosmos itself was slipping out of alignment. Or perhaps the violence marked the beginning of the end. After the pyramid was completed, something shifted, construction slowed, authority fractured. Centuries later, the city would burn not from foreign invasion, but from internal upheaval. Apartments were torched, murals defaced, the great avenues emptied. It is tempting to see the mass burials as a warning ignored. Imagine the night of the executions, drums low and steady, torches casting long shadows against carved stone, the smell of incense thick enough to blur breath, orders spoken in ritual language, rehearsed until they felt inevitable. One by one, lives ended not in rage, but in ceremony precise, efficient, irreversible. Above them, the pyramid rose, stone upon stone, sealing the act into permanence. A monument built not just of rock, but of obedience and blood. Those who lived afterward walked the avenue of the dead unaware, or fully aware of what lay beneath their feet. Children played, merchants traded, priests led processions that celebrated life's renewal. The city functioned, glorious and immense, its violence hidden in plain sight. When Teotihuacan finally fell, it did so without leaving a final explanation, no last inscription, no confession, just ruins and bones. The gods, if they were born here, did not stay. Today, the pyramid stands silent beneath the sun, its steps worn smooth by centuries of wind and footsteps. Visitors climb it seeking perspective, unaware that below, ranged with ancient care, the dead still keep their positions. They do not ask to be named. They ask to be remembered accurately. Teotihuacan teaches a difficult lesson, that civilizations capable of extraordinary beauty are also capable of extraordinary cruelty, and that the two are often bound together beneath the same stone. Some cities hide their crimes in shadows, others build monuments over them. And when the light fades across the valley and the pyramids darken against the sky, one cannot help but feel that the city of gods was built on a promise it could not keep. That harmony achieved through silence will always, eventually, demand to be heard. The stones of Rome have always been heavy with memory. They press down on the earth, layer upon layer, as if the city feared what might rise if it ever loosened its grip. Beneath those stones, beneath temples and forums and triumphal arches, a single crime once rippled outward, shaking the Republic without ever fully surfacing into daylight. It began quietly, as Roman crimes often did, not with blood in the street, but with absence. A man did not arrive when he was expected. His name was erased from conversation before it was erased from record. He had been a senator, respected, eloquent, dangerous in the way that ideas can be dangerous when spoken at the wrong moment. His home remained closed. His slaves vanished. His seat in the Senate was left conspicuously empty, as though no one dared to ask why. Rome was still young then, balancing precariously between kings it had sworn never to accept again and a republic that had not yet learned how to protect itself from fear. Power moved through alliances and whispers. Accusations were currency. Loyalty was provisional. When the man's body was finally found, it was not displayed. It was not honored. It was hidden in a shallow grave beyond the city's sacred boundary. Denied the rights owed to a Roman citizen, his throat had been cut cleanly. There were no signs of struggle. Whoever killed him knew exactly when and where to strike. The crime itself was swift. The aftermath was corrosive. Rumors spread faster than truth. Some claimed he had plotted to restore monarchy. Others insisted he had uncovered corruption among Rome's most powerful families. A few whispered that he had simply spoken too boldly, forgetting that in Rome, speech was a weapon that could turn inward without warning. What is known as this? No trial followed. No formal accusation was recorded. The Senate moved on as if removing a man were no more disruptive than removing a stone from a road. And yet, something had cracked. Rome prided itself on law, on procedure, on the belief that even enemies deserve judgment. This killing violated that belief. It suggested that fear had briefly outrun principle, that the Republic, still fragile, had chosen survival over justice. The silence was intentional. To investigate the murder would be to expose how easily Rome's ideals could be suspended. To speak the truth would be to admit that power, not law, had decided a man's asterisk, fate. And so the city did what it would do many times in the centuries to come. It buried the crime beneath. Ceremony in progress. Temples were built. Roads extended. Victories were celebrated. Rome grew louder, larger, more confident. But beneath, the noise, the absence lingered. Imagine the night he died, a quiet street lit by oil lamps. Footsteps approaching that did not hesitate. A blade drawn not in anger, but in resolve. No witnesses, no plea. The kind of killing that believes itself necessary. The men who ordered it may have slept poorly afterward. Or perhaps they slept soundly, convinced they had saved the Republic. History rarely records the private cost of such decisions. What remains unsettling is how familiar the pattern became. Rome would later drown in political violence. Assassinations would become public, theatrical, unavoidable. But this early crime, small, precise, nearly invisible, set a precedent. It taught Rome that silence could be effective, that memory could be managed, that a city could endure moral compromise if it refused to name it. When the Republic finally collapsed, centuries later, it did so under the weight of accumulated betrayals. Each unacknowledged crime added pressure, compressing ideals into something brittle and sharp. The unnamed senator was not the first to die for Rome's fear, nor the last, but his death marked a turning point, the moment when the city learned that it could survive its own dishonesty. The stones remember even when people choose not to. They hold the echo of footsteps that never returned, of voices cut short before they could change the course of history. And beneath Rome, where roots and ruins intertwine, the earth still carries the lesson that the most dangerous crimes are not those committed in chaos, but those committed calmly and then quietly forgotten. The morning light of Pompeii always arrived gently, slipping over tiled roofs and painted walls as if nothing terrible had ever learned to breathe. There, the city was accustomed to spectacle, laughter in taverns, shouts from the forum, the roar of the amphitheater, but it was not accustomed to waking up to death that refused to explain itself. The gladiator barracks stood not far from the arena, a place of sweat and ritualized violence, where men trained to die beautifully for the pleasure of others. Blood belonged there. It had rules. It had witnesses. It had meaning. What was found one morning inside those walls did not. Bodies lay where sleep should have been. Some slumped against stone benches, others collapsed near doorways as if they had tried, too late, to escape. Weapons were present, but not arranged. Blades were slick with blood, yet none rested in the hands of the dead. The air smelled wrong iron, and oil, and something older, heavier. Pompeii knew riots. It knew brawls that spilled from taverns into streets. It knew rivalry between cities, especially with Nuceria, whose clashes in the amphitheater had once drawn imperial punishment. But this was different. This was inward, closed, intimate. The gladiators were men who lived under strict control. Their movements were watched, their diets regulated, their nights counted. To kill them all at once, in their own quarters, required access, knowledge, trust. At first, whispers blamed the trainers, harsh discipline. Resentment turned lethal, but the wounds told a more complex story. Some men bore defensive cuts, others did not. A few showed signs of being struck while asleep. This was not a single burst of rage. It was a sequence. Others blamed the gladiators themselves, a revolt, perhaps, that collapsed into mutual slaughter. But no attempt had been made to flee, no gates forced, no weapons taken beyond what lay at hand. If this was rebellion, it was a strangely contained one, and it exactly where it began. What truly unsettled the city was how quickly the matter was closed. No public inquiry followed. No names were read aloud in the forum. The dead were removed quietly. Their absence folded into the city's constant motion. Matches were rescheduled. the amphitheater, remained open. Blood, after all, was part of Pompeii's economy, but silence does not erase unease. It concentrates it. The gladiators were not citizens in the Roman sense, but they were visible. They trained in public. They ate under watch. They were known. Their sudden erasure left a hollow that the city pretended not to see. Some said the killings were ordered. Gladiators could be dangerous in ways Rome preferred not to acknowledge. They were trained killers, admired by crowds, idolized by women and boys who dreamed of strength unbound by law. A group of them, bonded and restless, might inspire thoughts that reach beyond the arena in a city already known for disorder. Perhaps someone decided to act first. If so, the massacre was prevention disguised as chaos. Others believed the cause was more personal. Rivalries among the men themselves, stoked by favoritism, betrayal, or broken promises of freedom. In such a world, violence would not announce itself with banners. It would unfold at night, blade by blade, until no one remained to tell the story. What remains haunting is not which explanation is correct, but how carefully Pompeii avoided choosing one. Imagine the night itself, oil lamps guttering low, the barracks quiet, heavy with exhaustion, a door opening softly, a shape moving through shadow, the first strike quick and muffled, then another, confusion blooming delayed, steel flashing, breath turning to sound and then stopping altogether. Outside, the city slept. Pompeii was used to living beside death, but it preferred death that performed, death that entertained. This was death without audience, without applause. It violated the unspoken agreement between the city and its violence. And then, as if the earth itself wished to seal the matter, the mountains stirred. Years later, Vesuvius would erupt, freezing Pompeii in its final breath. Ash would fall like a curtain, preserving moments no one intended to remember. Bodies would be found mid-step, mid-prayer, mid-embrace. The city would become a monument to sudden endings. But the gladiators of the barracks were already gone by then. Their story unfinished long before the ash arrived. When archaeologists uncovered the site centuries later, they found traces bloodstains darkened into stone, weapons abandoned, rooms that felt wrong even in ruin. There was no inscription to guide interpretation, no official account to trust. Only the sense that something violent had been concluded too neatly. Pompeii is often remembered for its final day, for the roar of the volcano and the rain of fire. But long before the mountain claimed the city, Pompeii had already practiced forgetting. The massacre in the barracks teaches a quieter lesson, that some crimes vanish not because they are small, but because they are inconvenient. They interrupt the stories cities like to tell about themselves. They expose how easily spectacle can be used to distract from truth. The gladiators trained to die in public. Instead, they were killed in private, denied even the meaning their profession promised them. Their strength, their skill, their fear all extinguished without witness. Now, when night settles over Pompeii's ruins and the stone cools beneath the stars, the barracks remain a place where silence feels deliberate. Visitors pass through, sense you wait without knowing why. The walls do not explain. They wait, because even ash cannot bury every question. The streets of ancient Babylon thrummed with life beneath the weight of monumental walls. And yet even in its grandeur, the city held secrets darker than the Euphrates at midnight. Gold and incense, traders and priests, children and soldiers all moved beneath skies the color of ochre, unaware that somewhere within the walls, a crime was being woven so carefully it might never be spoken aloud. It happened near the Ishtar Gate, the blue and gold arch that celebrated gods and kings alike. The gate was meant to impress, to awe. Its reliefs of lions and dragons symbolized power beyond comprehension. Yet, the very stones beneath the lion's paws would one day be stained asterisk with a human act that defied reason and ceremony. A man of high rank, perhaps an official, perhaps a priest entrusted with sacred rituals, was found dead, not in ritual repose, not in the temple's embrace, but sprawled across the street in a manner that was both deliberate and chaotic. His body bore no marks of robbery, no evidence of an accident. Limbs were bent unnaturally. His head was canted to one side, eyes open, as though he had glimpsed something unspeakable before his death. Babylon was a city obsessed with law. Hammurabi's code had codified justice generations before, and yet here, at the heart of the empire, law had failed or had been deliberately ignored. Some whisper that the official had been caught in a web of palace intrigue, warning against those who might defy the king's will, or perhaps the will of his advisors. Others suggest darker forces, forbidden rituals gone awry, blood spilled. In error or vengeance, a curse enacted in the night that claimed life before it could be contained. The city responded not with investigation, but with silence. Records are vague, fragmented, and evasive. No trial, no decree, no public acknowledgement survives. The Ishtar Gate continued to welcome processions and traders. Life carried on as if the crime had been a shadow the city could afford to ignore. But shadows do not disappear. They linger, bending corners, inhabiting alleys, waiting for eyes willing to notice. Imagine the night of the act. Lanterns flicker against mud brick, whispering wind rattles the gates, footsteps echo on stone. A figure moves with intent, precise. The death is swift. There is no outcry, no witness but the moon and the stars, and perhaps a few birds roosting above the walls. The act is deliberate, ritualized in its secrecy, long after Babylon fell. When rivers shifted and empires erased its name, the mystery endured. Some crimes are left unsolved because naming them threatens the order that remains. In this way, the death at the Ishtar Gate became not merely a murder, but a meditation on fear, authority, and the human impulse to hide the truths too dangerous to be seen. And so, the city sleeps beneath centuries of earth, its gates still rising, silent, eternal, and within that silence rests the unspoken story of a life taken in the shadow of power, reminding all who remember that even in the greatest of cities, law and justice can be betrayed by silence. The wind that sweeps across Mohenjo-Daro carries more than dust, it carries secrets, older than the tallest brick walls. It whispers through the narrow streets, through courtyards lined with fired bricks, through channels that once carried water with precision and care. And somewhere beneath the regular rhythm of life, it tells of a crime that refused the city's order. A moment when death did not respect ritual or reason. The victims were young, healthy, strong men and women whose daily lives were bound to the pulse of the city, to its commerce, to its careful planning. Their bones, discovered centuries later, reveal a story both meticulous and terrifying. Some skulls are cracked as though struck deliberately, others show no marks at all. Limbs lie twisted, sometimes overlapping. They were not buried with ceremony, nor arranged for remembrance. They were left where they fell. A testament to violence that feared neither law nor witness. Mohenjo-Daro had rules. Life was structured. Death was ritualized. Citizens were known to honor their dead with care, even in times of hardship. To leave bodies exposed, unclaimed, unremarked, was almost sacrilege, and yet, that is precisely what occurred. It is as if the city's very heart had shuddered and struck out, letting some lives end in the open to remind the living of invisible danger. Who carried out the act? Some have speculated that it was famine or disease, a natural scourge so sudden that people died where they stood. But disease does not crack skulls, nor does it spare some while selectively destroying others. Some suggest invasion of rival city, a conquering force, but Mohenjo-Daro shows no signs of forced entry, no destruction of walls, no looting of valuables. The perpetrators were intimate, known to their victims, operating in the shadows of trust. Perhaps this was an internal purge, a way to maintain order in a society teetering on the edge of chaos. Perhaps jealousy, fear, or the breaking of some unwritten law demanded lives in payment. Whatever the reason, the victims were silenced without recourse, leaving no record, no lament, no warning for the generations to come. Imagine the night it happened. Oil lamps flicker against mud brick, the city quiet, as careful hands move with purpose. No cries escape, no one watches, only shadows observe the precision of death. The streets remain calm, the canals carry water as if unaware of the horror, and yet, the silence cannot hide the truth. When the city was eventually abandoned, perhaps the survivors carried the memory with them. A secret too dangerous to speak aloud, Mohenjo-Daro endured. But beneath its orderly streets lies a crime, so intimate, so carefully concealed, that even millennia later, it defies explanation. Some crimes, it seems, are preserved not in law or writing, but in the quiet persistence of absence, in the spaces between lives, in the whispering wind that refuses to forget. The morning mist clung to the hills of Masini like a veil, softening the edges of walls built to inspire fear and awe. The citadel sat high above the plains, its cyclopean stones massive, unyielding, as if the earth itself had risen to defend its people. Within those walls, life was structured, measured, and fiercely guarded. Kings ruled not just with authority, but with an unspoken command that every shadow be accounted for. And yet, in the heart of this fortress, a crime occurred that would leave no witness alive to tell its story. It began with a disappearance. A man of influence, perhaps a high-ranking warrior or a trusted official, failed to appear in the morning muster. Days passed. Doors remained closed. Servants whispered behind hands. The city maintained its rhythms, yet the absence was palpable, like a shadow bending the familiar shapes of corridors and courtyards. When the body was finally discovered, it offered little in explanation. The remains were placed deliberately beneath a staircase that led to private chambers bound, restrained, and showing signs of blunt force trauma. Some bones were fractured, others were untouched, as if death had been delivered selectively. There were no weapons left at hand, no note, no plea. The crime had been executed with a precision that suggested intimate knowledge, and perhaps even consent of those in authority. To conceal its truth, Mycenaeans were meticulous record keepers. For the age-wall inscriptions, grave goods, and tombs designed to honor life and death alike. But here, there was nothing. The absence of explanation feels intentional, a deliberate act of erasure. Perhaps the victim had spoken too freely, challenged the king's decisions, or discovered secrets that some were desperate to keep. Perhaps the act was ritualistic, a private offering to a god demanding blood too sacred to witness publicly. Whatever the reason, the city chose silence. Imagine the night itself, torches flickering along stone walls, casting long, twitching shadows. Steps approach quietly, measured, deliberate, hands restrain and strike. The echo of death is muffled only by the weight of the fortress itself. Outside, the city sleeps, unaware or unwilling to acknowledge that the foundation of its daily life had been altered by unseen violence. Long after the citadel fell into ruin, archaeologists would uncover the remains, scattered beneath stone as if the city itself had pressed them into place. No name could be assigned, no story reconstructed fully, and yet, in that absence, the act remains potent a reminder that even the most orderly civilizations harbor darkness within their walls. That silence can be as deliberate and as damning as the strike of a blade, and that some crimes are preserved not in words, but in the weight of stone and shadow. The city of Carthage rose from the marshes of the North African coast like a promise. Its harbors alive with sails, its asterisk, markets thick with the scent of spices and salt. Here, power was both commerce and devotion. Wealth was intertwined with ritual, and religion threaded through every act of governance. Yet, even in this meticulously ordered world, a crime unfolded, so carefully it became invisible, a shadow within a shadow, whispered only by what remained unrecorded. It was the death of children small, fragile lives offered in fire to appease the gods. Some evidence suggests it was not an accident, nor a rare, desperate act. Cremation urns, buried within sacred precincts, contain the remains of infants. Arranged with care and ritual, each tiny body tells of intention, of belief, and of a society willing to cross the threshold of innocence for protection, favor, or perhaps fear. Carthage revered Baal Hammon and Tanit, deities whose demands sometimes included human offering. Archaeologists uncover thousands of urns, each containing evidence of carefully performed sacrifice. Some have argued that these were symbolic gestures, ritualistic and controlled. Others suggest actual deaths, deliberate and calculated. The act is difficult to confront because it collides with the human instinct to preserve the young. It is a crime woven into devotion, impossible to disentangle from belief. Yet the crime is not only in the act itself, but in the silence around it. Carthage was an empire that kept records of commerce, treaties, and warfare, and yet, nowhere does it document these deaths with the frankness of its other dealings. The children were offered, their ashes preserved, but their names, their cries, and the reasoning behind their selection were erased from narrative. The city continued its trade, its festivals, its growth as if the young lives consumed in fire were small prices paid for survival and favor. Imagine the night it happened. Torchlight flickering over clay and stone, priests moving silently among tiny bodies, flames rising to the sky, smoke curling like whispered prayers, families present, or perhaps absent, held in fear, awe, or resignation. The act is precise, controlled, sanctified, but still crime in its essence. A taking of life without consent, a crossing of what we now understand as sacred boundaries. What haunts historians is less the ritual and more its permanence. The children rest in urns, neatly arranged beneath temples, their deaths sanctioned by gods yet condemned by conscience. Carthage's greatness, its mercantile empire, its enduring influence is built alongside this silent, terrible obedience. The city itself eventually fell, razed and destroyed by Rome, yet the urns survived. A quiet indictment across the centuries. They speak of devotion turned dark, of order demanding cruelty, of innocence claimed by belief, and even now, when the wind sweeps across the Tunisian plains, one can almost hear it, the soft whisper of lives taken, remembered only in the silence of stone and ash. The city of Tyre rose from the Mediterranean like a jewel of stone and salt, its harbors alive with the comings and goings of merchants, its walls gleaming in the sun, its streets narrow and labyrinthine. Traders, sailors, and artisans moved through its alleys with the confidence of a city that believed itself untouchable, protected by the gods and the sea alike. And yet, beneath that confidence, a crime unfolded that would stain her memory with shadows centuries later. It began not with war, but with betrayal. A prominent citizen, a man whose influence stretched from the docks to the council chambers, was found dead in his home. His body bore the hallmarks of deliberation, a deep gash across the throat, hands bound, and eyes fixed in a gaze that suggested he had seen something he was never meant to witness. No weapon remained. No intruder was recorded. The city went about its business. Yet the absence of this man created a tension that lingered like a shadow across the harbor. Tyre was a city of law and commerce. Contracts were sacred, oaths binding. Yet here, law had failed or perhaps been deliberately circumvented. Rumors circulated that the man had uncovered corruption among the city's ruling elite, that he had threatened to expose those who enriched themselves at the expense of sailors, merchants, and citizens. Some whispered of foreign interest rivals, from Sidon or Byblos sent to eliminate a threat before he could act. Others suggested an internal feud, family vengeance carried out with precision in the dead of night. The crime was deliberate, intimate, and concealed. Tyre recorded wars, trade agreements, and tributes, but nothing about this death survives in official records. It was as if the city chose silence, burying the truth beneath the bustling streets and the tide of commerce. Even the family of the victim seems to have accepted, outwardly, the city's imposed forgetfulness, leaving the crime unspoken, unavenged, and unresolved. Imagine the night it happened, lamps guttering against stone walls, the harbor quiet except for the soft lapping of water against wooden hulls. A figure enters silently, moves with purpose, and strikes. The man's last moments are private, intimate, and irreversible. Outside, life continues. Traders hackle, children play. The waves lap against its foundations, ignorant or unwilling to witness what unfolds. Centuries later, when the city would be conquered, rebuilt, and reshaped, the crime's imprint remained not in monuments or inscriptions, but in the persistent unease that shadows leave behind. Tyre's grandeur endured, yet even as empires rose and fell, the death of that citizen remained a question unanswered, a whisper in the corridors of history that power and silence often conspire, and that some crimes are remembered only in the absence of their telling. The streets of Corinth shimmered in the Mediterranean sun, the scent of olives, salt, and fresh bread mingling in the air as merchants called to each other along narrow lanes. The city was prosperous, a hub of trade and culture, where wealth and influence were displayed openly, and secrets were carefully concealed behind high walls and whispered conversation. But beneath this veneer of order, a darkness took root, one that would echo through the centuries without explanation. It began with a disappearance. A magistrate, known for his scrutiny of trade and dedication to the city's laws, failed to appear at the council. Days passed with no sign of him. Courtiers and fellow officials offered excuses, then silence. Corinth had a reputation for law and justice, yet this absence stirred unease. Something had happened that could not be spoken aloud. When the body was discovered, it was in a place of daily life, not a ritual, near the city's central agora. Beneath the steps where citizens gathered for commerce and debate, the magistrate lay unmoving. His limbs were contorted, bound by cords that left deep impressions in the flesh. The skull bore blunt trauma, precise and deliberate, yet no weapon remained. The act was swift, intimate, and carried out with knowledge of the city's rhythm. Someone understood where and how to strike without alerting the populace. Some suggested political motives. Corinth thrived on alliances, trade contracts, and maritime agreements. Perhaps the magistrate had uncovered corruption among the elite, some scheme involving wealth diverted from public coffers or power quietly consolidated. Others whispered that it was personal vendetta enacted with cold calculation, a lesson for those who dared challenge authority. In either case, the city's response was silence. The law failing where it was most needed, Imagine the night itself, the market empty, lamps flickering, shadows twisting across the marble columns. Footsteps approach, quiet, careful, hands restrained, forces applied with control. The magistrate's last breaths are stolen in darkness. Outside, the city sleeps, unaware of the violence committed in its heart. No records survive. No trial was held. Life resumed, commerce continued, festivals celebrated, and yet, centuries later, the crime whispers from the stones, a reminder that even in cities famed for law and culture, justice can be bent, ignored, or erased entirely. Corinth endured, but the asterisk. Magistrate's death remains a silent testament to power, fear, and the cost of secrets left unspoken. The city of Knossos rose from the fertile plains of Crete like a labyrinth carved from sunlight and stone. Its walls were frescoed with dancing, bowls and priestesses in flowing robes, its corridors twisting in deliberate complexity, a mirror of both divine order and human ambition. Life here was ritual and rhythm, harvest festivals, religious ceremonies, and political councils all maintained the fragile harmony of palace and people. Yet within this harmony, a crime occurred that would leave no testimony but the echoes of walls and the stains of fear. A high-ranking official, perhaps a priest or palace steward, vanished without warning. He was a man whose influence spanned the palace, who knew the corridors of power and the secrets of the rituals performed within. Days turned to weeks, his chambers remained locked, servants whispered behind their hands. The labyrinth seemed to close around itself, as if the walls themselves were complicit in erasing his existence. When his body was found, the discovery was disturbing in its precision. He lay in a hidden chamber beneath the palace floors, bound and arranged with meticulous care. The skull bore marks of blunt force trauma. Limbs were twisted, yet the arrangement suggested ritual intent rather than mere violence. There was no sign of robbery, no sign of struggle beyond what was necessary to restrain him. Someone had acted deliberately, knowingly, and with a purpose that remains hidden to this day. Knossos had laws, customs, and religious observances, yet none accounted for such a death. Some suggest political intrigue. Perhaps the official had challenged the ruling elite, or uncovered corruption within the palace's sacred administration. Others whisper of ritual gone wrong, of a ceremony demanding blood sacred to expose openly, and of a death meant to restore balance in ways the living could not understand. Imagine the night itself, torches flickering against frescoed walls, shadows dancing on painted bowls, hands move with intent, binding, restraining, and striking. The victim's last breaths are shallow and stolen, his struggles silent against. Stone outside, life continues, servants sweep courtyards, priests chant in the sunlit halls, and the labyrinth itself absorbs the sound of violence, hiding it from all who do not know where to look. When Knossos fell and its walls crumbled under centuries of abandonment, the crime remained. Archaeologists would later uncover the chamber, the marks of ritualized violence, the deliberate arrangement of the body, but no names, no explanation. No confession survived. It is a crime preserved not in record, but in silence, a reminder that even the most structured and sacred cities conceal shadows within their heart. Knossos endures as a labyrinth of memory and mystery, and in its quiet halls, the act lingers, a testament to ambition, fear, and the human willingness to erase what cannot be controlled. The city of Pataliputra rose on the banks of the Ganges like a jewel of mud brick and timber, its walls thick, its streets alive with merchants, soldiers, and courtiers, all moving beneath the shadow of palaces built to honor both kings and gods. Life was measured in rituals, processions, and proclamations, yet beneath the order, a crime unfolded so deliberate, so intimate, that the city itself seemed complicit in its concealment. It began with a disappearance. A minister, entrusted with the treasury and with access to the king's inner chambers, failed to attend council meetings. Days passed, then weeks, with no word. Courtiers whispered behind closed doors. Servants glanced nervously at one another. The river flowed, markets thrived, yet tension thickened in the palace, as if the very walls held their breath. When his body was found, it revealed careful violence. He lay in a hidden courtyard, limbs bound, with cords that cut deep into flesh and muscle, the skull bearing precise blows. The wounds suggested speed and efficiency rather than rage. Nothing was missing, not gold, not jewels, not documents. Only the man himself had been taken from the world. The act was intimate, executed by hands that knew the palace well and its rhythms thoroughly. Speculation abounds. Some suggest he had uncovered embezzlement or betrayal within the king's circle, threatening those whose power depended on secrecy. Others hint at court intrigue, rival factions eliminating a voice to daring, to principled, to dangerous. A few believe the act may have been tied to ritual, a symbolic offering to maintain the king's favor or to avert a threat too great to describe in words. Imagine the night, torches flickering against wooden beams, shadows stretching unnaturally. Along polished floors, a figure moves silently, cords in hand, steps precise and deliberate. The minister is struck, restrained, and silenced. Outside, the river continues to flow, its surface catching reflections of stars indifferent to human schemes. No formal record survives. No trial was held. Life continued. Palaces were maintained. Markets thrived. And the river carried its steady rhythm. Yet beneath the surface, the act lingered, shaping trust and fear in ways the city never admitted. Even centuries later, when archaeologists uncover the ruins, the crime remains a question written in absence. The body found, the wounds noted, but the motive and the perpetrators forever unknown. Pataliputra endures, a city of order and ceremony, and yet within its stones, one can feel the quiet weight of lives deliberately erased, a reminder that ambition, fear, and secrecy have always walked beside power. The city of Tycho rose from the dense Guatemalan jungle like a crown of stone and canopy, its temples piercing the sky, its plazas alive with the rhythm of ceremony and trade. The Maya moved here with precision, measuring time in stars, sun, and moon, recording events with meticulous glyphs carved into stelae and codices. Life was structured, sacred, deliberate. Yet beneath this order, a crime unfolded so carefully that its echoes are still heard in the silence of the ruins. It began with a sudden absence. A ruler or high-ranking noble, known for his authority in both ritual and governance, vanished from the city's heart. He was expected at ceremonies, at councils, at the great plazas where his presence reinforced order and hierarchy. Days passed, then weeks, and no explanation emerged. In a city that measured time and chronicled deeds, such a disappearance was extraordinary. When the truth was uncovered, it was chilling. The body had been placed in a chamber beneath the temple of the great jaguar, bound tightly and positioned in a manner that suggested ritualized precision rather than chaos. The skull bore evidence of blunt trauma. Limbs were twisted unnaturally, yet carefully arranged. No offerings or symbols were left to honor the dead. No inscriptions recorded the act. The murder had been executed with knowledge of the temple's secret spaces and a terrifying attention to detail. Speculation surrounds motive. Some suggest internal court intrigue. Nobles, eliminating a rival before succession or ritual authority, could be challenged. Others whisper of ritual gone awry. The ruler may have defied a secret obligation. Or perhaps the act itself was a ceremonial necessity, a bloodletting meant to appease gods who demanded perfection or obedience. In either case, the city chose silence, preserving appearances while concealing the violent truth within stone and shadow. Imagine the night, torches guttering in the temple corridors, shadows elongating across hieroglyphs, the scent of incense masking the metallic tang of blood. Hands restrain, strike, and position the body with careful deliberation. Outside, life continues. Priests chant, merchants trade, children play, oblivious to the act that has reshaped the city's spiritual and political landscape in a single moment. Centuries later, archaeologists uncover the chamber, the careful placement of bones, the marks of violence, but no names, no narrative, no confession. Tycho endures as a city of ritual, measurement, and ceremony, yet its stones whisper of a crime, hidden in plain sight, a death executed with precision, remembered only by the shadows, the stone, and the silence left behind. The city of Teotihuacan, long abandoned yet still imposing in the valley of central Mexico, holds stories that refuse to die. Its grand avenues stretch straight as arrows toward the horizon, flanked by pyramids whose weight seems to press the sky itself downward. Among these stones, a crime once occurred so deliberate, so unsettling, that even centuries of decay have not washed it away. It began with a sudden rupture in the city's rhythm. A high-ranking priest, responsible for overseeing ritual offerings and sacred ceremonies, vanished from the temple precincts without explanation. He was a man of influence, privy to the mechanisms of power that maintained the city's spiritual and political order. One day he was present, the next, he was gone. The city's residents continued their lives as if to ignore his absence. Yet the silence itself seemed unnatural, a deliberate veil over what had transpired. When the body was discovered, the scene revealed a combination of violence and ritual intent. The priest had been killed within a chamber beneath the pyramid of the moon. His limbs carefully arranged, his head bowed unnaturally. There were no weapons left behind, no markings to suggest robbery. Only the precision of an act performed by someone intimately familiar with the temple and its hidden spaces. The arrangement of the body suggested purpose, symbolism, and intention. Warning perhaps, or a corrective act meant to realign order in the city's hierarchy. Speculation abounds. Some believe it was political approach to remove a man whose authority had become threatening. Others whisper of ritual missteps. Perhaps the priest had committed an offense against the gods, or some prophecy demanded his life as a necessary balance. Yet the city left no record. The walls, adorned with murals of feathered serpents and jaguars, say nothing of the crime. Teotihuacan chose silence, burying its own failure beneath the veneer of permanence. Imagine the night itself, torchlight flickering against stone, shadows stretching unnaturally across the walls. The chamber is quiet except for careful footsteps. Hands restrained, strikes are delivered, and a life is ended with both precision and ritual. Outside, the city continues to pulse. Traders call to one another, drums echo in distant plazas. Incense rises in the temples, but within that secret chamber, the world has been irrevocably altered. Centuries later, archaeologists uncover the chamber, the arrangement of bones, the marks of deliberate violence. Names are unknown, motives lost to time, yet the weight of the act remains. Teotihuacan endures as a monument of order and grandeur. Yet within its stones and avenues, the echoes of a crime hidden in secrecy whisper, still a reminder that even the most magnificent cities hold darkness beneath their brilliance.